Welcome! In this series of videos we will look at software add-ons for both the PowerBasic console and Windows compilers. Today we will look at SQL Tools, an add-on from Perfect Sync software. There are times when the applications on our computers need to communicate with a database. There are many different types of database. While the database itself may be stored on the computer we are using, it may be located far away on a server. The application on your computer needs a mechanism by which to communicate with the database. Traditionally, each type of database had a proprietary driver layer you needed to go through to communicate with the database itself. As each type of database required a different driver, this meant your application needed to be coded from the start for that particular type of database, and switching to a different type of database did involve a learning curve and a lot of work. ODBC, the Open Database Connectivity Layer, made this much easier as our application and our programmers needed only to learn a generic series of functions, and the ODBC library took care of communicating with the proprietary driver. This library exists on your Windows computers as ODBC-32.dll. While you can write your PowerBasic code using calls to that ODBC library, it's still a fair amount of work. Enter the SQL Tools library, which sits between your application and the ODBC library, and makes the task of accessing databases easier still. The SQL Tools library comes as both a DLL and a PBlib file, so it can be embedded inside your application with the PBlib or sit beside your application as a DLL. As I said, there are many different types of database, ranging from a simple text file through Excel spreadsheets, MS Access databases, up to large relational databases like Oracle and Microsoft SQL Server, and everything in between. To operate on a database, there are 4 basic types of operation that you can do: create, read, update, and delete. In this series of videos, we'll be covering topics which are common to both the PowerBasic Windows compiler and the PowerBasic console compiler. In order to do this, I've set up a small common library to allow us to display information on the screen from a program regardless of whether you're using the Windows or the console compiler. There are 3 basic functions in this common display library. There's prep output, log, and wait. SQL Tools is a remarkably well documented and robust library for accessing any ODBC compliant database. SQL Tools is a purchased product and comes in 2 versions: the SQL Tools Standard and the SQL Tools Professional. The Standard version supports up to 2 simultaneous database connections with up to 2 concurrent SQL statements running. SQL Pro supports up to 256 simultaneous database connections with up to 256 concurrent SQL statements on each connection. In this video, we'll be using SQL Tools Pro, although all the code we'll be using will be just as usable under SQL Tools Standard. The database we'll be using is the free version of Microsoft SQL Server. SQL Tools comes with both a PDF and a help file. The PDF file is some 950 pages long, but don't let that put you off. I'd much rather use a system that was well documented than a system that wasn't, and this system is remarkably well documented. So let's have a look at the code. What we have in our demonstration program here is 2 includes for the Windows API and 1 for the common display library. What I've added to this is an additional include for the SQL Tools include file and the addition of a link command to pull in the PBlib. So in this program we're embedding the SQL Tools library inside our application. You can alternatively reference the DLL, or if you're using SQL Standard, embed its library, or include its DLL. Now, because we're going to be doing a number of these videos on SQL Tools, I've created a standalone generic SQL functions library which we'll be adding to as time goes on. So before we start writing code, let's have a quick look at the database. Our database in here is a very small database called Food Store, sitting on Microsoft SQL Server Express. It has very few tables in the database and not much data. However, this is enough to demonstrate what we're going to be doing today. I'll include in the description links to Perfect Sync's website, where you can contact them for details, and also links to a number of sites where you can actually learn more about SQL. SQL Tools currently retails for the cost of $100 for the standard version and $200 for the professional version. However, you can contact Perfect Sync for more specific details. So the first thing we have to do is the library we included up here. The include file I have at the top of the screen here is the one that contains your license code. So naturally I can't show you that library. So the very first thing we need to do is we will paste in the code that checks that we have a correct license to use using this call within the SQL Tools library called SQL Authorize. If this returns anything other than success, then you do not have a valid license. However, I'm sure you'll all be buying licenses for SQL Tools, so that shouldn't be a problem. Having checked that that is okay, the next thing to do is to call SQL initialization. This prepares the library for use. Now we can start looking at connecting to our database. Now, there are a number of ways of actually connecting to a SQL database. You can connect to the database using a connection string. You can connect using a DSN file, a dataset name file, or you can prompt the user to key in information. What we're going to do today is we're going to create a connection string. This means the user doesn't have to key anything in, and the program can run on any computer because there are no additional files needed on that computer to define the database connection. We are also going to have a long result variable, which we'll be using to test whether any of our operations have been successful or not. So what we need to do first of all is to put in our connection string. Now, the standard for setting up a connection string is first to define the driver you'll be using. Today we're using SQL Server. You can then put in your user ID and your password. Now this is the user ID and the password that you've set up, in this case in Microsoft SQL Server, to connect to the database. SQL Server databases can be connected to either using a named SQL Server account or using your Windows account. Following that, you put in the name of the database to which you wish to connect and the name of the server that actually hosts that database. The connection string will be specific to the type of database you're actually connecting to. For example, the connection string to an Access database would be quite different to the one we're using here for SQL Server. What we're going to be using today is Trusted Connection. This means that the user you're signed on to the computer as has been set up with specific permissions in the database itself. This saves having to give a username and password inside our code. This usually is an important step on big production databases so that the password and username are not embedded in the source code and therefore no one can know it. So how do we go ahead and actually open our database? Well, the call we're going to be making here is to a function within the SQL Tools library. And this one is called, strangely enough, SQL Open Database. And we're going to pass this particular one two parameters. Our connection string, and I'm going to put in an optional parameter, in this case, which is one of the constants within SQL Tools to prevent the application prompting the user for any database connection information should our connection to the database fail for any reason. So having put that very simple call to a function in, we then have to test to see, did it work? Have we actually connected to our database? So I'm going to put a simple case statement in, and there are two possible successful codes we would get back. SQL success and SQL success with info. And should we get anything else back, this would be an error. Now we'll cover getting back an error message from this call in a moment. But once you've actually done everything you need to do in your database, you would normally be expected to close the database down. So we have two functions. SQL close DB will close down the current database. And a final call to another function called SQL shutdown. This will close any open database and shut down SQL Tools. So the command we had to close our individual database isn't absolutely necessary in this particular case, because the command following it, SQL shutdown, would close down all open databases. But you may have times when you wish to close down a specific database but not actually exit the application, in which case you would want to use close DB. Now let's have a look at our code then. So we have confirmed that the license is authorized to use the product. We have initialized SQL Tools. We have prepared a connection string. In this case, the connection string is actually going to be a trusted connection to the database. We have called the SQL OpenDB with a connection string and an optional parameter to say we want the user not to be prompted in case the connection doesn't work, and we will report the connection success or failure. Now if we just try compiling that now to make sure it looks okay, which it does, and we'll run our program, and it says connected OK. So let's just change the name of the database to one that does not exist, and then run my program again, and it says not connected. Now if we want more specific details of why a function did not actually work, we want to put in something to tell the user. Now, I have prepared a generic library which I spoke about a moment ago called generic SQL functions. Now this has only got one function in it so far, but this is quite useful. There is a function within SQL Tools which will return information on the oldest record in the error stack. And having got that record, it then removes it from the stack and lets you move on to the other one. So what this little loop will actually do is it will continue pulling back information until there are no errors left to tell you about. And it will do a bit of replacing of information in those strings just to cut down the length of the data it's passing back. So if we add that function in, and we run that now, and there is our error message. Quite succinct, saying the database has not been opened. So this is a very short introduction to what SQL Tools can do. There will be a considerable number of videos following this one covering SQL Tools in more detail. But that's it today. Thank you for watching.